feel about the PSVR2 headset? It seems like Sony abandoned it. And it wouldn't be the first time Sony has abandoned something. Check out my video on the PSP. In 2021, Sony announced that it was going to be working on its next VR headset. It was described as the next gen VR that enhances everything from resolution and field of view to tracking and inputting, and then roughly a year later the PSVR2 was released. And fast forward a year after that, the PSVR2 has not reached its full potential by any means. Between the lack of first-party exclusives, the steep price, the lack of backward compatibility, and retail delays, the PSVR2 has barely made any strides whatsoever. It just seems to be collecting dust in everybody's room. The PSVR2 was sold exclusively on the PlayStation Direct website for the first few months of its release, which was the first problem. It was not until May 2023, roughly 3 months after the headset had been launched, that it was made available to retailers like Amazon and GameStop. Now, amid the layoffs within the game industry that included the closure of the VR-focused PlayStation London, it seems like PSVR2 may have been on its last legs. But there's no denying that the PlayStation VR2's hardware is fantastic. The OLED displays, great controllers with haptic support, eye tracking, and that's to just name a couple. But yet, like I said earlier, one of the main reasons this VR failed is the lack of exclusive content. Let's look at the PSVR2's initial lineup, which actually featured over 40 games, which when you think about it is a pretty good number for a launch. But when you actually look at what games those were, it was only 3 exclusives. And only one of those games, Horizon Call of the Mountain, went beyond an optional VR mode. There's no denying that Meta dominates the VR headset market. And not just because it doesn't need to be tethered to another device like the PSVR2 needs to be tethered to the PS5 in order to work. But the Meta Quest actually has a good amount of exclusives, like Resident Evil 4 VR and Asgard's Wrath 2. The former, unlike the PSVR2's versions, is based on the 2005 original game remade from the ground up in virtual reality. But surprisingly, third-party support for the PSVR2 has been pretty good. Despite describing the PSVR2 as a AAA VR platform, Sony doesn't even seem interested in having its AAA studios work on it, which is weird. And it's sad to say, it's like they're starting to get lazy on us. I don't know if you've noticed, but there hasn't really been a lot of PlayStation news recently. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because I always post when there is something to talk about, you know? It almost seems like they're letting other companies kind of sweep them under the rug, and it hasn't been like that for a while, so I'm really surprised. Aside from multiple unannounced games canceled by the company, some of the companies affected by the layoffs include aforementioned London studio, which worked on 2 PSVR games, including 2019's Blood and Truth, while Fire Spirit, which developed PSVR2 games like Air Force Special Ops Nightfall, The Persistence, and more recently Horizon Call of the Mountain, also lost staff. But this isn't really just a PlayStation thing, this is a game industry thing that's been happening over the last year. Just companies are just, laying off people for numerous reasons. So kinda like I mentioned earlier, this isn't the first time that Sony has pretty much abandoned a console. Because if you don't know, they did the same thing with the PlayStation Vita. Sony's gaming handheld released in 2011. At the time, the Vita was intended as a big budget gaming handheld, but the system lacked support and other issues resulting in underperforming in comparison to the PlayStation Portable. And I kinda did more of a deep dive in that topic in one of my last videos, make sure to go check that out. But now it seems that the PSVR2 is unfortunately suffering the same fate. But why isn't there any AAA supports in this market, with very few developers willing to make VR versions of their best games? One of the handful of developers that were willing to take the leap was actually Ubisoft. But during a recent earnings call, it said that it has no plan to increase investments in VR following the disappointing sales of Assassin's Creed Nexus VR, which launched exclusively on MetaQuest headset last year. After all the enthusiasm for Half-Life Alyx, the anticipated wave of big budget VR releases has failed to materialize. And this probably is all just because they're not seeing that people are excited to be playing these VR games. They don't want to waste their time on them, you know? But it's like, how can we get excited if we don't even know what to get excited about? Like, how does that make sense? They're not showing us anything that makes us want to pay attention, that makes us want to go and spend $500-600 on this thing in addition to buying a PlayStation 5. And you know, even for the games that it has been putting out, Sony doesn't put any marketing into the PSVR2. Can you guys tell me the last time you seen a commercial for that thing? Marketing and price points aside, they just are not selling units. Apparently, they only sold like so many units during the 2023 holiday season. I guess it was way lower than they thought it was gonna be. So maybe they just saw that there was no interest in it and they stopped putting money towards it, which is kind of sad. One cool fact is the PSVR2 accounted for only 5% of VR headset sales in the world, while the Meta Quest headsets combined accounted for 75%. And I think the PSVR2's biggest problem is that they just don't have the games to justify the price. They don't have enough games, they don't have the good games, you know? And it doesn't look like that's gonna be improving anytime soon. So sorry guys, if your headset's still sitting on the counter, it's probably still gonna be sitting on the counter. Sony needs to consider bringing its more first-party games into the VR world, even if it's not a big release like Horizon Call of the Mountain. I can see a game like Astrobot or, you know, any of those, you know, like mascot games coming to the VR pretty easily. I think that'd be really cool to see. And they really need to think about lowering the price. But I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think that the PSVR2 is worth it? And what do you think could get the PSVR2 more sales? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Pause for now, play forever. AK out.